Kagurabachi Chapter 71 has arrived, so let's get straight into it, but fair warning, it's a tearjerker. Alright, so Chapter 71 is titled Contest, and it begins with a 9-year flashback to when Iori was just a little girl, and we see that she is actually in the hospital with her mother, who is sick, and we are introduced to her as Inori, and find out that she is Somra's ex-wife. So the chapter begins with Somra bursting in the hospital room, and he goes, "Hey, Inori, I heard you collapsed all of a sudden." And she says, "Hey, please, not so loud. Yori is the one that called the hospital, and she's over there." And Somra turns to see his daughter, like, sitting on a bench in this hospital room. And he says, "Oh, Yori, long time no see." And Inori says, "How can you expect her to even remember you? Iori, this is your father." We then cut to later in this conversation where Inori says, "So, I'm not going to be able to go home for a while. You'll need to take care of Iori." And Samura's like, "Whoa, wait a minute, me? I can't do that. What about your sister?" And she says, "She's still working for the Kamunabi. She doesn't have time." The plot thickens. And we see that Samura, like, flashes back to his time during the war and his hands bloodied with all of the people he's cut down. And he says, I can't hold my daughter with these hands." And Inori is just getting fed up. She says, "You've said that thousands of times already during the divorce. Who's going to take care of her then, Somra? She's your daughter." And he says, "Yeah, that's why." And she goes, "Ugh, at a time like this, that's just enough, okay? Let it go. It's time to look forward, not back." We then see Samura and Iori walking down the street, Samura having obviously agreed to look after her. As they're walking, he says, "Hey, I need to make a quick stop." And the two of them step into a dojo where we see a bunch of people practicing their sword play. And as he walks in, all of the students are like, "Oh, Mr. Samura, welcome. We weren't expecting you today." And he says, "Well, I just wanted to introduce you. This is Yori." And they're like, "Whoa, what? You have a daughter, Mr. Somra?" And he's like, "Yeah, she's gonna be coming in with me for a while. I'm sorry." And they're like, "No problem, no problem. Did you know that your father is an amazing guy?" And Mr. Somra is like, "No, stop." And they just continue. One of them says, "All of the cops in this city take sword fighting lessons from him." Another one says, "Your father's a contracted bearer of the enchanted blade. He's a war hero." A third chimes in and says, "Yeah, this country owes its existence to him." And this is Yori the whole time. She is not impressed. And eventually she's just fed up and she screams, "Oh, really? Who cares if he's a war hero?" We then get a quick flashback of Iori walking with her mother and asking, "Hey, what's my father like?" And her mom says, "Oh, he's the worst. He's totally hung up on the past and he totally neglects us. Don't ever fall for a guy like that, Iori." We then cut back to this moment where Iori is still screaming. She says, "You're not amazing at all. You abandoned mom. Loser." We then flash back to the hospital scene where Inori says, "I'm sorry, Iori. It's just for a little while, okay? You're going to have to go live with him and please listen to him." And Iori says, "But mom, you'll be home soon, right?" And she says, "Of course. I'll kick this stupid thing's butt real fast." We then cut to the dojo, but I believe it's a different day at the dojo because now we see that Yori is holding one of the training swords and is practicing. And she's actually got her eyes closed and she says, "Any bad guys better watch out for me too." And then she charges and runs straight into the wall. And Samura is like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what are you doing? Did you just close your eyes and charge? Why would you do that?" And she says, "You should fight on the same level as the enemy." And Samura says, "That's an admirable sentiment, but you shouldn't try to imitate me. I've been blind for years. I have the ears and nose of a beast at this point." And she just goes, "Ugh." She's thinking to herself, "Impressive." And then out loud, she says, "Then I'll just have to train really hard. Na 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 na. You can't catch me." And she runs away. And he's like, "Whoa, hey." And I just noticed this. The next panel is just an outer shot of the dojo. And there's another, like, blonk sound effect. So presumably she ran away with her eyes closed and ran into the wall again. We then cut to another scene of the two of them visiting Inori in the hospital, and Inori is just scolding Samura, saying, "You're not supposed to let her get hurt. That's like basic parenting 101." And Iori is just laughing in the corner. We then cut to Iori and Samura back at home preparing dinner in the kitchen, and we see that Iori has an idea, and Samura says, "What is it?" And he goes, oh, a cooking contest now. She always wants to compete with him. And he can see that she is chopping vegetables with her eyes closed, and she's wielding like the reverse grip on the chef's knife, very similar to the white purity style. And Samura goes, do not tell me you've got your eyes closed. And she says, yeah, they're closed. And he goes, not when you're using a blade. And he goes, hey, you're holding that backwards. And Yori says, it's a contest. It has to be fair. And Samura says, screw the contest stuff. What is your deal anyway? It then cuts to the two of them actually eating the meal that was prepared. And Samura says, this is amazing. And Iori laughs and is like, right? I win, right? And Samura says, why is it a contest? But fine, you win. And she just keeps laughing and says, I'm a good cook. Mom and I cook together a lot. And then she says, Mom and I, and starts to get sad. Samura sees this happening and he doesn't know what to do. So he goes, let's have a contest. Let's have a contest. And she goes, what? And he says, whoever can make the tastiest food for Inori and cheer her up the most wins. And Iori goes, you're on. We then get this quick montage of just all of the time they're spending together and everything they've been doing. The two of them then deliver this food to Inori, and she goes, wow, you made this, Iori? And Samura says, it was supposed to be a contest, but we sort of ended up working together. And her mom says, oh. And Iori says, yeah, the fruits of a healthy rivalry, you might say. And her mom says, is that so? Well, this is delicious. It's the best. And Iori says, does it make you feel better? And she's like, yes, absolutely. I feel fantastic. And we can see that Samura isn't as happy as everybody else here. Obviously, probably realizing that the mom's not getting better, but he can see the joy on both his daughter and ex-wife's face, and he does crack a smile. And Inori then says, I'm going to get even better at cooking. Excuse me, Iori said that. I'm going to get even better at cooking when you get out of the hospital. Just wait. And her mom says, well then, I'll just have to hurry up and get better, won't I? And then in an absolutely brutal transition, the very next panel is Inori's funeral. And we see that Yori is just sitting alone as Somra walks up behind her. We then cut back to the hospital on the same day that they brought her the food. And we see that Yori is now asleep on the couch, allowing Somra and Inori to speak to one another. And Inori says, I'm sorry, I don't think I can last much longer. And Samura pauses and says, well, you did great hanging in there for a whole year. And she pauses in response and says, since when did you learn how to cook? And he says, since never. I got the guys at the dojo to coach me on the side. And she laughs and says, really? You've changed over this past year. What do you think of Yori? And he says, she's cute. And he goes, even though you're blind? And he says, listen, I don't have to see, all right? She laughs like you do. Samura then remembers how Iori said, you abandoned mom. And Samura says, I'm sorry for everything. We then cut back to the funeral where Samura sits down next to his daughter and says, hey, Iori, how about we call a truce? And he thinks back to the conversation with Inori, and Inori says, I just wish I could see her grow up. He then thinks to another moment where Inori said, look forward, stop looking back. And then Samura to himself says, I'm going to get even better at cooking. And then we just see Iori start to cry, but Samura puts his arm around her and he thinks to himself, I'll keep watch over her for you. We then cut to a shot of Iori sleeping in her bed, so it's either later that same day or perhaps just at a later date. And we see that Samura takes a step outside and lights a cigarette. And when he does, he is approached by Yura, who walks up into their estate. And he says, who are you? And Yura says, pleased to meet you, Saichi Samura. And Samura says, I don't know who you are, but do me a favor, don't make me draw my blade. And Yura says, for the future, huh? Don't worry, we're just here to talk about the sins you lot committed. And we quickly get a panel of the Blade Master sitting in his prison. And then Yura says, and the disaster that will befall this country as a result a few years from now. And we get this full page panel of this destruction. And that's where the chapter ends. What a fantastic chapter, man. This was a breath of fresh air in the worst way, because it absolutely ripped my heart out. And I mean, this legitimately was a tearjerker for me, because I mean, moms, okay? I mean, that's a surefire way to get to anybody's emotional core. But then beyond that, like losing someone to an illness is just, it's rough, man. And so yeah, this just get you a man that can do both. Okay, Hokazono can give us the beautiful action choreography, and then also hits us with the introspective emotional punch as well. And this is why I love Kagurabachi, man. This it just gets you a man that can do both. So for Hokazono to really elicit that emotion in just 18 pages, like we were introduced to this character and this dynamic in this chapter, and then it was brutally ripped away from us. Now, don't get me wrong, like there are a lot of, for lack of a better word here, tropes that were used to elicit that emotion. But so I'm not saying nothing crazy out of the ordinary was done here, but it was done well and it was executed well. And yeah, like just fantastic chapter. I shouldn't even say this because I shouldn't even give light to hypothetical toxicity because I haven't seen any of it yet, and hopefully there won't be any of it. But thinking back to something like JJK, if we had a chapter like this, I just know like there would be so much chatter about like, oh, boring chapter. Where like let's get back to the fighting, and so, ugh, again, why am I calling attention to this? It doesn't exist, not that I've seen, but to anybody that feels that way, just come on, man. The stories aren't stories without the emotional things that tie us to them. So I really loved getting this insight not only into Iori's background, but obviously Somra's background, and seeing, this dysfunctional, broken man because of the things he had to do in the war. Not only cost him his relationship with his daughter, but obviously his wife. We find out that they were divorced, right? And there's so many things coming to mind right now. Trying to stay on one track. But it just makes sense, right? I think this is a very great depiction of somebody with CPTSD, right? Like he is very much struggling with the traumas he went through there. And that's obviously one of the grander mysteries in Kagurabachi right now. What exactly did they do? And, we have some pretty good guesses. War crimes, mostly, right? But he doesn't feel fit to hold his daughter with the same hands that took all of those lives. And it's poetic, right? And then I love the way that we got to see their relationship develop over that montage of the year they spent together. She obviously has a lot of pent up resentment and anger towards him, but at the same time it's her dad, right? She wants to not only impress him but emulate him and be better than him with all of the contests that we're having, and her closing her eyes to learn how to wield the sword and to cook because she wanted to be on an even playing field, show him that, what, I am better than you. But then that, develops into an actual real relationship at some point beyond just, wanting to prove him wrong. And it was just, again, all executed so well. Okay, let me try to organize my thoughts a bit. Real quick, just how cute is a young Iori, man? She has so much personality. She's so bubbly as a little girl, which is starkly different to this kind of muted version that we've seen in the present timeline right now, which I think is probably largely attributed to the fact that she's had a majority of her memories wiped away, right? Her personality kind of gets lost in those memories being lost. So I'm interested to see if we kind of see more of this playfulness and goofiness now that her memories are back. Now, even though they're back, there's a lot of kind of trauma and darkness she's going to have to deal with as well. So deal with now as well. So that might similarly mute that personality like losing the memories did. But in any case, I'm hoping she can kind of reemerge out of her shell now that she remembers. All right, next, just who are you, Inori? Because what do you mean your sister is in the Kamunabi? Like the plot thickens, okay? Because that wasn't necessary. And I don't mean that in like a bad way. I just meant that this character could have just simply been Yori's mother and Somra's ex-wife, and the emotional ties are all there. Everything in the story is served, but no, like we have some intrigue there. Her sister's in the Kamunabi. Like what did she do before she got sick? Like was she tied to the overarching things also happening in the world right now? What is she even ill with, right? Could there have been foul play here? Like, I'm not saying there is, but that potential is now there because how far does this orchestration from Yura in the Hishaku go? Like, if you need to get somebody to help you see your plan through, and we know he has a deal with Samura, could this have even been part of it? Like, the long con. I don't know. I don't know. That maybe is too conspiracy theory for this part of the story. But again, that one line about her sister in the Kamunabi, there's something there. Now, I don't know what it is yet, but I'm curious. So this might be Iori's aunt. I don't think we can say for sure, but this was the only female member on the like high-ranking officials of the Kamunabi. Now, she might not have been a high-ranking one, right? She could have just been a, peon within the Kamunabi that we haven't met yet. But this could be her, and this just makes the plot thicken, right? Because we know that there was at least at one point a contingency plan to use Iori like to get to Samura. So would she have been cool with that? Also, the parallels with Chihiro just got further ingrained in this chapter because, I mean, there was a similar scene like this with Kunishige and Chihiro, right? And we know that both Samura and Kunishige are tormented by their past and they're trying to teach the future a new way. We know that Kunishige taught Chihiro how to forge enchanted blades. He worked with him every day. We now have confirmation that Samura was working with Yori every day, teaching her swordplay, but also teaching her the lessons to probably correct the path where he believes he went wrong. So I'm very interested to see how Hokazono takes these two molds in Chihiro and Iori and does different things with them because that's what would be interesting, right? But we can see that obviously they've got their differences, but for the major like points of how they've been molded by their fathers, very similar so far. But we know that Samura and Kunishige obviously have very different views on what they ultimately did with everything that happened to him. Kunishige was just trying to make a better future and teach this responsibility to his son, whereas Samura is like, no, I got to take this into my own hands and make things right. So, will Iori also follow that same path like her father and thus become not an enemy to Chihiro, but not exactly aligned with him? I'm just very excited to see what he does with Iori now that she remembers. And speaking of their parallels, I think there's one more major thing that's going to have to happen to Iori first before we see the trajectory that her life takes. And I think she's going to have to lose that guiding force in her life very much like Chihiro did. And it's going to be, I don't want to say even harder for her because she already lost her father in the form of her memories being stripped away. Now having them returned, I think it's inevitable that she's going to actually lose him again. And now let's talk about Yura because there is a lot to unpack here. We actually get to see this meeting between him and Samura that we knew about where they made some sort of deal, right? And he speaks about this future that is essentially inevitable, the disaster that will befall this country a few years from now as a result of Samura and the Enchanted Blade Wielder's actions during the war. And the way this is presented is as if it's a future of Japan, right? This hasn't come to pass yet, but it will. So why, right? We've got the flowers here, and we also had the panel of the Swordmaster. So is this his doing? And if so, like, is this a future that Yura is trying to prevent? Or is this a future that Yura is trying to ensure? Like, I think it could go either way at this point, but it's just fascinating, right? Because is this destruction like because of a fight that happens? Or is this destruction like intentionally to destroy Japan? Like, is it collateral or targeted, if that makes sense? And who just even is this guy, and how does he know that, right? How does he know what the future holds? And does he literally know what the future holds? Is there some sort of foresight ability at play within the Hishaku, whether it's Yura's ability or sorcery or someone else's, right? We still don't really know what is capable of. We had that really vague line from Double H about like getting the information out of the clerk's head a few chapters back. So there's definitely still some mysteries there, but a lot of people have theorized that they may have some sort of future sight ability that they are leaning on. And so perhaps Yura knows that that moment is going to pass, and that's how they've been orchestrating everything that they've been orchestrating, because everything's been coming up Hishaku so far in the story, right? He knew about Chihiro and what was going on there. They obviously orchestrated the entire auction and the Sanuchi Blade stuff, this meeting with Samura, and this future he's referring to literally in this scene. So something very interesting is happening there. And very specifically in this chapter, he makes a weird statement when he first sees Samura talking about, don't make me draw my blade. And he says, for the future, huh? I thought that that moment read a bit strangely, so I wondered if perhaps something had been lost in translation there, which has happened before. So I reached out to Piku over on Twitter, and if you're not already, give Piku a follow. He's a fantastic Kagurabachi analyst, and I think talks about a lot of different manga and anime. But Piku reads and speaks Japanese, and I've talked to Piku before about specific translation stuff. You guys might even remember. So I reached out to him and I asked him about this. I was like, hey, that sounded weird. Like, was there something different happening in the Japanese there? And as you can see, Piku says there's a theory that it could be mind reading, meaning that, Yura perhaps in that moment was reading Samura's mind and realized that Samura was thinking, like, don't make me draw my blade because I will to, like, protect the future, to protect my daughter, all that stuff, right? And so Yura, seeing that telepathic thought, is like, oh, for the future, huh? Don't worry, I'm just here to talk. So that would make sense to me. That would make the flow of that line digestible. But Piku says there's a theory that it could be mind reading, but the reason I personally disagree, even if such a thing is confirmed later on, is because usually these types of contextual hints are at the least bolded, if not parenthesized, in the raws. This is just treated as another dialogue piece. So we kind of got a great look at two perspectives there. Yes, he could have been mind reading and it could have been a subtle clue, but Piku thinks that if that was what was going on, there wasn't enough contextually on a meta level to let us know. So, I don't speak Japanese. I don't know about these types of nuances, but what I'll say is if it was a mind reading thing, then perhaps there wouldn't have been those clues to enhance the reveal later, if that makes sense. And then in that same thread, the one in Oni chimed in, and this is another fantastic follow for my Kagurabachi fans out there, who basically helped illustrate the mind reading future sight perspective here, where they say that Yura seemingly has future sight, foresaw the destruction of his island beforehand, meaning he would be from the island that they went to war with. And if I can't remember its name right now for some reason, maybe we don't even know it, but he's been plotting up to this point ever since. That's why his plans are so well thought out and he doesn't stress the variables. He sees inevitable futures. Perhaps he can't see Chihiro. And the one in Oni goes on to point out this juxtaposition between Samura, this man who can't stop looking backwards and is, always dwelling on the past, perhaps being met with like the reflection of that in a man who looks toward the future. And I love that. So, I'm not saying like, let's ship it. This is exactly what's happening here, but this would make sense to me. And it would also help explain the weird phrasing of that line for the future, huh? I wouldn't say I'm completely sold one way or the other yet, but in any case, it's interesting. And it's especially interesting considering that line was seemingly also weird in the original Japanese. So there's something to peel back there, whether it's future sight or otherwise, right? So I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on this. Also, like, I know it wasn't that long ago, whatever this flashback is with Samura, but Yura looks exactly the same to me, and maybe he just ages really well, takes good care of his skin, but like, what's going on? He also wasn't there the day that Kunishige was killed. Shihiro's like, you weren't there, but he's the leader, right? So like, why wasn't he there? Could he have perhaps looked different? Can he shape change? Is this not his true appearance? And this appearance always looks that way and is why it doesn't age. Like, I don't know. I think this is my longest Kagurabachi video ever, which is funny because this was a flashback chapter about a side character with no action, and it just goes to show how good this chapter was. But because this video is so long, I'm going to start to wrap it up, but I did want to point out one very insightful thing that was shared over in the Discord by Lily. Shout out Lily. And also, shout out the Discord. If you guys aren't a member of the Discord yet, come join us. I would love to have more Kagurabachi people in there so we could have more Kagurabachi discussion going on. We've already got some great discussion happening every week, but it's never a bad thing to have more Bachi bros. But what Lily points out here, and y'all can pause to read the whole thing if you want, but is essentially just like kind of the poetic devastation in the fact that, Inori's goal or wish, her dream was that she could see Yori grow up, and she kind of passes that on to Somra to holster that for her, and just the fact that Samura blinded himself because of his sins in the past, and so now on a literal level neither of them will be able to see her grow up. And I already spoke about how I think Somra is not long for this world, so even with the irony of the blindness aside, probably neither are going to see them grow up. And, let's just throw on the compounded fact that Samura had to choose to forget her, and the parts that he did see her grow up have been lost. Now, those will probably be restored, but again, it's just so tragic, and just again speaks to just how well Hokuzono was able to cram all of this development into a single chapter. And then last but not least, I wanted to give a huge shout out to Branwin, who sent in some support on last week's Kagurabachi video, who says that he bought a paperback copy of Volume 1 to give to his roommate to get them into the manga. And I love that. Now, this may come as a surprise to some of you, but I actually do not own a single physical manga volume of anything. So I think I might have to make Kagurabachi the first one just because I want to support this manga. It's getting enough. It's not like it's going to get canceled or anything, but I may have to follow suit there and buy some of my own, if only to give out to some friends to get them on this peak, because we need more Kagurabachi bros in the world. But again, Branwin, thank you so much, man. Anyways, I've yapped enough, but please share all of your thoughts on this chapter down in the comment section, or better yet, join us in the Discord and talk to us there. But as always, y'all, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.